Scripture reading for today comes from Isaiah chapter 40, verses 28 through 31. Have you not known? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He does not faint or grow weary. His understanding is unsearchable. He gives power to the faint, and to him who has no might, he increases strength. Even youths shall faint and be weary, and young men shall fall exhausted. But they who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint.
So it's 5 a.m. in the morning, and your alarm goes off, and you immediately want to hit the snooze button, obviously. You told yourself this morning, or the night before, that you were going to go running in the morning. So you get your shorts, and you go outside. It's dark, and everybody else is asleep. And you get overwhelmed just thinking, man, I have to really run far today. And you try to convince yourself not to go because you're getting sick to your stomach thinking about how uncomfortable that's going to be, and you almost convince yourself not to do it. Anyone who has ever ran a race knows how difficult it is to start training for it or even to continue training for a race. And we have several people in here who are athletes or ex-athletes, people who've coached sports, who've been sports, or even college record holders are here today. And these people know what it takes to be good at a sport. It takes a lot of sacrifice and discipline and a lot of pain to go through what it takes to be competitive, to win, and to get through what you need to get through. And just the training it takes to run a 5K race, which is 3.1 miles, it takes a lot to do that, especially when you're used to sitting and on the couch, and it takes persistence and dedication to do that, and especially patience, because you're not used to being that slow. You don't like the time that you have. And being a Christian is similar to the running, and many biblical authors, especially Paul, and the author to the book of Hebrews, draw this analogy of racing or being an athlete and being a Christian. And this is what we're going to examine today: the endurance it takes to run our Christian race. And I'm preaching this sermon because I know that I need to hear this. Because the theme for this year is to become like Jesus, right? I mean, it's a very lofty goal. The hardest goal to have is to be like Jesus in this life. And to do that it takes a lot of endurance. And a lot of the times we've probably failed to do a lot of the things that we've preached about, we've learned about, that we know that we ought to do. We might have started doing them. We might have started implementing good things in our life. But for some reason we've stopped. It could have been life getting in the way. It could have been discouragement. Could have been temptations in our lives have gotten us off track, caused us to take a break, caused us to not be doing what Jesus has called us to do. And so I know that I need to hear this sermon because I experienced this in my life, where I feel like I've lapsed. I feel like I've taken my eyes off of what I'm supposed to do, taken my focus off of what I'm currently doing because of the pain, because it's hard and it's difficult. And so I fully sympathize with everyone who knows that it's very hard to live the Christian life. But yet we are called to have endurance, called to get back up after we've fallen. So today I'm preaching to myself, but I'm also exhorting each one of you and hopefully encouraging you as well to run alongside me and continue this race. So let's go turn our Bibles to Hebrews chapter 12, and we'll just be looking at 3 verses today. Before we get into this lesson too far, I want to reiterate the sense of urgency that we need to have as Christians. Jesus calls us and tells us in Mark chapter 13, verse 33, that we need to keep on the alert. In verse 35 and 37, he says, stay awake. We need to be watchful. We need to be vigilant. We are not supposed to be relaxing all the time. We need to be aware and keeping awake because we don't know when the master's going to return. We don't want to be caught sleeping whenever he comes and checks on us. We want to be found doing what he called us to do. We're also in a spiritual battle, as we read in Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 12, and we know that Satan goes around like a lion trying to devour us. He is fighting us and is going to get us, and so if we are off our guard and not being watchful, we're going to get lured into temptation. We're going to be found wanting on the day of judgment. But the author of Hebrews calls us to have endurance in this being watchful because it's pretty exhausting to continue to being watchful, especially when everything around you seems to be telling you to stop, to give in to your desires, to stop with the pain and the hardship that it takes to be a Christian. And so in chapter 12, we see that the author of Hebrews uses a racing metaphor to spur on his audience who's undergoing persecution and hardship, which he talks about in chapter 10. They must run this race that is laid out before them. And I often listen to endurance athletes, and I look to them because I admire them for the endurance that it takes and the mental fortitude that it takes to do what they do. And they have to endure mental and physical pain for maybe hours, depending on how far they're running, in order to continue that. And they have to do that every day. Every day they have to go through that and know what it takes to do it, to get better. And many of you all, as I've pointed out, have been on sports teams. You all know what it takes to be disciplined in a sport. But the Christian life is very similar to that. And if you're not familiar, maybe you haven't been a part of a sports team where it was really taken seriously, where your coach pushed you beyond your abilities, I suggest that you look up and research what these professional athletes or just even amateur athletes must do to compete and win. But the crazy thing is to me is that these people go through all that suffering, all that seeming torture to us, all for records that can be broken or for a trophy, but we are doing this for an eternal, everlasting prize. We are doing this for something that's going to last forever. And so we have an even more important award that's going to be given to us if we continue to run this race. It's going to be entirely worth it, as we see and know. So let's go into Hebrews chapter 12. Therefore, we also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. For consider him who endured such hostility from sinners against himself, lest you become weary and discouraged in your souls. So we look to this example, this exhortation to this audience, that they need to continue running this race. And so let's read this as if it's written to us, that he's exhorting us to keep on going and keep on running this race. So first, he says that we are surrounded by this great cloud of witnesses, these people that are before us, and he's alluding to all these people mentioned who were faithful in chapter 11. And these people who ran this race before them, who are witnessing them, beholding you running this race, and that they've run before you, encouraging you. And so you're being watched and looked upon by these other people who've went through what you've went through or worse, or went through what you're going through currently or worse, and you're encouraged by them. But in addition to that, he says, lay aside every weight. So whenever you're running, if you've ever trained for anything, you might have resistance training when you're doing it, but whenever you run an actual race, an actual marathon, do you want to continue wearing those ankle weights? You want to continue wearing that weighted vest? Probably not. It's probably not going to get you your PR if you continue doing that. So we know we need to get rid of sin, maybe as he says later on, but we also need to dispose of anything that hinders us from running this race. Whether it can be something good, maybe not something inherently bad, but we need to get rid of whatever is encumbering us, whatever is keeping us from running as efficiently as possible. If we continue to run with these weights attached to ourselves, these things that entangle us, we're like a woman who's trying to escape from a burning building but goes back and tries to carry with her old photos. You're not supposed to go back from anything. I'll get, if Adam were here, I'd get him to tell you probably. But you aren't, so we shouldn't be trying to go back into the world, trying to say, I want to do this. We aren't supposed to be like Lot's wife and look back upon the destruction that's behind us, but rather look ahead to our safety, to what's ahead of us. We do not need to get distracted or encumbered by these things that should be a part of our past life. In Jesus' parable of the sower, we see that the seed is cast onto various types of soils, but the thorny soil is the one that chokes out the word, that chokes out the seed from growing effectively. It might sprout, but the plants aren't going to be able to grow and bear fruit. And what did he say that those thorns, that thorny soil represented? It was the cares of this world, the things in this life that can take our eyes off of what we're supposed to do, take our eyes off the truth, take our eyes off the word. And so we need to get rid of these things that maybe they're not inherently bad, but they're keeping us from distracted, keeping us from running this race. So whenever you're running and you're prepared to go running, you want to take the gold out of your pockets. Maybe that's what's encumbering. Maybe it's your money that you're trying to carry around with you. You're trying to acquire more wealth as you keep on running this race. You get distracted by all the shiny things around you. These are the things that are keeping you from going ahead and on the course. Is the money, getting ahead in the rat race, progressing in your job. You're so concerned with your work that you are neglecting to feed yourself spiritually, neglecting the nourishment of the word, neglecting nourishing your own families, your children, your siblings, your parents spiritually. Maybe you need to change out of your fancy suit before you go running. Maybe it's trying to have an appearance before others of wealth. Maybe it's an appearance of pride before others. Trying to be show off who you are and caring about what everyone else's opinion is of you. Maybe that's what's hindering you and distracting you from the goal that is set before you. Maybe you need to take the blindfold off of your eyes before you start running. Sometimes media can be a blindfold to distract us. And I'm not just talking about social media. I'm talking about any sort of media, books, television, anything can be a distraction to us and take us off our guard. The news can cause us to be distracted by thinking that is the narrative for our lives, where the Bible clearly gives us a different narrative, that we have hope, we have redemption, we have that even if the world is going into chaos, the world is in a place of disarray, we have hope that God is going to restore all things and make all things new. So we need to make sure that we are getting these things out in front of our faces and put the Word of God in front of our eyes. But maybe you have a backpack full of burdens that you're carrying with you. Maybe it's grief, disappointments, hardships. These all no doubt make things harder to run the race. But if you bring these things before God, these burdens will not hinder you from running, but will actually help you hasten even faster toward Him, make you less distracted, because you are focusing on the healer, the one who is able to make all things right for you. And And running this race means that, yes, it will be painful, but you know that if you endure, Christ and God will bring healing to you. As we see and Paul talk about in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, in verse 16 through 18, he said, "Therefore we do not lose heart. Even though our outward man is perishing, yet the inward man is being renewed day by day. For our light affliction, which is but for a moment, is working for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory. While we do not look at the things that are seen, but at the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporary, but the things that are not seen are eternal." Whenever you're running, you know that pain is going to end when you cross that finish line. And if you stop before that point, you're going to regret that you quit. You're going to regret that you did not keep on going. And that's the promise that we have from God, that it is worth it in the end. That even that pain that we are experiencing in the moment, that's going to renew us. That is going to make us rely even more upon God. That is going to make us stronger. That is going to help us take off that old man and put on that new man that we started putting on at baptism. So these burdens that we carry in life, while they hurt in the meantime, we can look forward to the healing that God has in store for us. And know that if we continue to endure, that these burdens will be worth the bearing. So we need to lay aside every weight that we can as we run this race, and to make our lives as simple as possible. So he says that we need to run the race set before us, and this takes simplicity. If you are running, you have one goal in mind, and that is to finish and help others finish with you. And runners and physical runners, they try to be as efficient as possible. They don't carry extra weight that they don't need to. They have as light of clothes as they possibly can. They have the correct breathing and the correct cadence and the correct stride. So if you have a great form, it helps you to utilize all the energy in your body in the way that's most efficient so that you can run farther with less effort. You have to relax all the muscles in your body, in your face and in your arms that you possibly can, so that you don't use excessive energy during this run, so that you don't run out of energy as you continue to try to finish that marathon. So you can't be, fiddling with your clothes, with your watch all the time. You can't be doing that. You have to make everything as simple as possible and working towards that one goal, that one thing that you are striving towards. You aren't trying to look cool as you're running the race. You aren't trying to keep up some sort of appearances. You're not trying to make money. You're not trying to do anything but finish. So as you run this race, you need to keep things simple as possible. And keep your life as simple as possible and striving towards that thing. And we can look towards what Paul says to Timothy in 2 Timothy 3-5. "Suffer hardship with me as a good soldier of Christ Jesus. No soldier is in active service entangles himself in the affairs of everyday life, so that he may please the one who enlisted him as a soldier. And also, if anyone competes as an athlete, he is not crowned unless he competes according to the rules." So you cannot expect to live like the rest of the world and still be expected to finish this race. You have to live a different life. If you have grown up with any athletes, maybe I don't know. Like in college, the athletes, they live a different life. They didn't go to all the same social events that people go to, because they have, practices that they have to make early in the morning. They have, on top of their studies that they have to do for college, they also have to have that job of competing, keeping their scholarships. So you have to live a different life than everyone around you. You're going to have discipline. You're not going to be able to hang out at the bar. You're not going to be doing all the things that the world does. You are going to stand out. And so so whenever you're running this race, you're going to have to be as efficient as possible, and you're going to have to look different while you're doing it than the rest of the world. But we also will have to have endurance. When you are feeling pain and anguish in your emotions, you're going to feel tempted to stop running this race. We've all been there. We've all been tempted by our emotions, whether it be we want to do something that we're not allowed to do, or it's painful and grievous to keep on doing the right thing. We might suffer for doing the right thing in this life. So it could be that you're highly discouraged. It could be that you're disappointed. Others have let you down and hurt you, and you feel like giving up, and you start to feel self-pity. But I'll let you in on a secret. All you have to do is not give in. That's all you have to do. Not give in. And it may sound overly simplistic, but in this life, there's nothing else that we are called to do besides be disciples of Jesus. And so we should be willing to drop everything that we are currently doing. It could be our work. Maybe you're tempted at work. You're in the wrong mental space for work. And you're being tempted as you do that. You need to just stop work at that moment. For what's going to be worth it? Is it going to be worth it to continue working but then end up sinning in that moment? Or is it going to be more worth it to stop, take a break for a while, to maybe pray to God for as long as it takes until you do this? Maybe you need to stop other things and just focus on not giving in. But whatever it is, that we need to know that this is the one thing that we are put here to do. If we don't do that one thing, that's like Usain Bolt saying he doesn't have time to run. That's like Joe Burrow saying he doesn't have time to go to practice. If we are failing to do what we are put on this earth to do, then that alone is what the world tries to distract us with. So one thing that has helped me is sometimes we just need to break down before God and process everything with Him. That helps us to endure. Listening to His voice, but also putting our grievances before Him, like Neville has been teaching us whenever we sit in that class on the Psalms in the mornings. We read about the psalmist, especially David, going before God, laying before his griefs before Him, processing all this grief before God. We need to take the time to do that in our lives and not just try to push ahead with what the world says we have to do. So sometimes I've started running myself, but it was not because I enjoy running. I still don't say I love running, but in the last year I found it to be extremely beneficial, spiritually and mentally. I don't do it primarily for the physical benefits, but it helps me to physically understand what it means to have endurance. And it's just like a little practice of what it means to delay that gratification and to just take on feeling uncomfortable for just a little bit longer so that you can finish. And so, if you start a routine and you start disciplining yourself in this way, whether it be a physical way or a spiritual way or both, these things can help you to learn what it means to endure, to persist, and continue and keeping on going. But one of the ways that we can keep on going is by looking to Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, as it says in verse 2. For it says that Jesus is the perfect example of one who has endured. And He did it because of, first, the joy that was set before Him. Sometimes the joy and the reward, that's what's on our mind. That's what is going to keep us going and driving us. The hope of the joy is what Jesus had to look forward to while He was on the cross, suffering shame and anguish. So we need to continually keep the promises of God before us in our minds, thinking about them, thinking this is why it's going to be worth it. Whatever the world has to promise me, we know that's not going to last, but what God has to promise, that's going to be what's lasting for me. That's going to be why I endure. That's going to be why I keep going. Are you going to just keep Jesus hanging there? Are you going to think about how he endured for joy, but you think it's not worth it? But he also, when he was on that cross, he despised the shame. He despised those around him who tried to make fun of him. They tried to put him on that cross naked, to try to put a sarcastic plaque above his head saying he was king of the Jews with a crown of thorns on his head. They put him to shame, but he despised it. He didn't care about it because of that joy that was set before him and because he knew that it was going to be worth it. People are going to make fun of you because you're running a race that they're not running. They're not going to get you. They're not going to understand you. Jesus repeatedly tells his disciples that the world isn't going to get you as disciples. They're going to misunderstand what you're about because they misunderstood what he was about. They ended up putting him to death. And why should we expect the world to treat us any differently? Even other Christians may look at you funny because they think that you're taking things too seriously. They're like, they'll think that you need to chill out. And they think that you're missing out on something. But whenever people try to guilt you into feeling like you're missing out on something, just know that whatever you sacrifice in this life for running this race, God promises to restore to you 100-fold in the next, as he says in Mark 10 and verse 30. Is it going to be worth delaying gratification? According to the Bible, yes. It's going to entirely be worth it. We see Moses just in the previous chapter, in Hebrews chapter 11, that he says in verse 24, by faith Moses, when he became of age, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin. He chose to endure. He chose the life of suffering, to take up his cross and follow Jesus. So we have to consider Jesus and think of him so that we won't give up. In Hebrews chapter 12 and verse 3, it does tell us to think about him, how Christ is the perfect example of endurance. And that example that he lived by, we also get the reward that he got. We know that we must suffer with him in order that we may be glorified with him. And so what are you holding on to? Are you trying to run the race while holding on to bars of gold? Are you trying to compete in a marathon while wearing a suit or high heels? You may be trying to hold on to something in this world that is distracting you from running the race as efficiently as you can. And it may be quite a sacrifice to get rid of that thing. It may feel like you're cutting off your own arm because you're so used to having that thing with you. But we need to lay aside that thing because it's really just getting in our way, and we will truly be free to run like Jesus ran if we do that. What do you put before your eyes? Are you putting some faulty example before your eyes other than Jesus? That you live by some worldly example rather than his example? We look to various different people for advice and they might just want to comfort us rather than telling us the truth. They might tell us something that we want to hear and that's contrary to what God's word says. But once we fully embrace the truth, that is when we will truly be free to be athletes, to run like Jesus ran. And before you do that, you will live in frustration because you are believing lies. And the truth is that we must suffer like Jesus suffered. We must endure like he endured. The truth is that we cannot and should not try to avoid this suffering that he endured on the cross. And the truth is that we too must look toward the joy set before us. So today, your legs are heavy. You're tired. You're exhausted. Your lungs are burning. Your feet are sore and blistered. You just want to stop so that you don't feel this pain anymore. And on top of your body telling you to quit, you hear the mocking voices of those around you saying, why are you putting yourself through this pain? Why suffer pointlessly? You are putting yourself through needless suffering. You are foolish to keep on going. You are thinking and acting irrationally. Just give up now and you won't have to deal with this pain anymore. We'll stop mocking you. You're missing out on so much enjoyment and so much life by doing this to yourself. Look how much fun we're having. Be like us. Be yourself. Chill out. Do what you're doing, or do what we are doing, and you will feel great. As you listen to them, they hurl not only insults at you, but also obstacles in your path. You lose focus, you stumble, and you fall. You lie there hurting, bleeding, and blushing before them. However, in the distance, you also hear other voices. There's a crowd of those who have already finished the race before you, who went through what you are going through or worse. They are watching you and witnessing the power of God working in you. But they aren't just standing there. They are cheering you on, yelling your name, and screaming at you to keep on going and to ignore the dissenters. But most of all, you have Jesus, the one who ran before you to make this race possible. And you know that he has called you to run in this race. You know how much he sacrificed to get you there, to prepare you for it. The suffering that he endured, the ridicule he was exposed to. How could you disappoint him by quitting now? So get up. Get off your knees. Pick up your feet. Take deep breaths. Stop feeling sorry for yourself. Embrace the pain you feel in your body and your spirit, and count it as joy that you even get to run in this race, to experience this discomfort. Look in front of you. You've already come so far. Ignore the comments of those scoffers and trollers. Ignore the false offers that they promise you with persistence. Laugh back at their ridicule. Despise the shame that they expose you to. Look ahead toward the finish line and know that this will not last forever, that there is glory and true joy once you cross that threshold. Jesus himself is waiting there, sweaty, beaten, and bruised from the abuse, but smiling nonetheless as he wears the victor's crown, as he encourages us, saying, do not fear what you are about to suffer. Be faithful until death, and I will give you the crown of life. You too can receive this victor's crown today. You can benefit from the promises of God that he made. He says in Revelation 3:5, he who overcomes will thus be clothed in white garments, and I will never erase his name from the book of life, and I will confess his name before my Father and before his angels. And in 3 in verse 21, he who overcomes, I will grant him to sit with me on my throne, as I also overcame and sat down with my Father on his throne. We must suffer with him in order that we may be glorified with him. So today you can become a part of this race. You can become a child of God by believing in his name, by repenting of your sinful life, by confessing that Christ is the Son of God, and by being baptized in Christ and dying the same death that he died. If you have any needs this morning, please come as we stand and sing this invitation song.